Corbin Moss, welcome back to Moss to the Flame. Today, I have an extra special treat for you. We have Nicole Wilson with us today. Hello, Nicole.
Hi there, Marie. How are you?
I am so great. I'm so glad that you got to, first of all, that we got to meet at StokerCon, which was
Yeah.
exciting and awesome. And then we got to talk a little bit, and we're going to talk about on the pod today your newest novella out, The Shadow Dancers of Brixton Hill. So I am excited about that. For our listeners, Nicole Wilson is an award nominated author known for her horror and dark fantasy works. Her debut novel, Tide Pool, came out from Parliament Press in 2021, and it was a finalist for a Bram Stoker Award and the Ladies of Horror Fiction Award for Best Debut. You are a 2017 Pitch Wars alum, and like we just talked about, her novella, The Shadow Dancers of Brixton Hill, just released from Cemetery Gates in June of 2023. But that's not all, because you have an upcoming YA horror novel, The Keeper of the Key, publishing from Parliament House Press in fall of 2024. So that is all super exciting. But I think one of the most fun things, a fun fact about you, is that you got to be on Jeopardy, right?
Yes, that was a blast.
That is so awesome. I'm going to have to go back and find your episode. So was it like, before we get into the book and all of that, tell us about that experience. Was it just like it is on TV, or like what's it like behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's funny. It really is. They run a very, very tight ship. I feel so fortunate that I got to do the show while Alex was the host. It just, I like King Jennings, but I don't think it would have felt quite the same. But,
I agree.
But yeah, it's surreal. Sometimes I still can't believe it actually happened now. But, it just goes very, very quickly. And it was just a wonderful experience. Everybody there was super nice. I came in second, but I had a great time. So.
Hey, that's awesome. Second place is amazing. I think a lot of people, they sit at home, they're like, "Oh, I can do this." No.
Yeah,
Not for everyone.
living room Jeopardy is a lot easier than the real thing.
That's so fun. That's awesome. So you've had your debut on the television. So now when you go to do interviews for books, you're going to be an old pro. No big deal, right?
At StokerCon, when I was getting to do my first in-person reading, I was so scared, and I told myself, you've been on Jeopardy. This is so much less scary than that.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. Well, and I think too, the intimate experience of a reading like that in a room with people that have chosen to be there, and they, you know what I mean? Like they really want to hear you read. That's so awesome. So
yeah,
just to be surrounded by people that are in support of your work and they want to hear what you have to, I love that. I think that's great. So,
yes.
First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm one of those people. I really do not remember a time when I wasn't writing something. Like I wrote Star Wars fanfic before I knew that's what it was called. And
Awesome.
yeah, I was just always writing little short stories, or I tried a comic strip where, about a girl and her pet dinosaur, stuff like that. It's just always been a thing for me. And
Okay, cool.
yeah, like some of my elderly relatives still have stuff I wrote in crayons when I was like 5. So.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Well, save all of those things. Now we know, because then that can go in your future archive, right?
Yeah,
Like
really.
in the Hillman Library. Yeah, eventually save all of those things. I like to joke about how I need to burn most of those things because my angsty stuff does not need to make it out into the world. But
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've got some like, oh.
Yeah, what are we doing here? Okay, awesome. So your book, the most recent novella, the one that we're talking about today, is set in Brixton Hill. So I want to know, why did you choose that location as the backdrop for the story?
I just kind of I just imagined like a small fictional town that I just set in Virginia because I'm familiar with the area because I live here. So, and I guess part of the concept of the story was just a place that had just really been blasted by the Depression and was still trying to get back on its feet, but not really managing. So it would kind of add to why the trainer is doing what he does during the course of the story. So,
Definitely.
Yeah, but I definitely I'm drawn to the kind of. I'm kind of drawn to rundown small towns. A couple of my books have been set there, or just small, sort of spooky towns. And Brixton Hill doesn't play a big role in the story the way that Tide Pool did for Tide Pool, but it's still, I just wanted it to be sort of a factor in why the story plays out the way it does.
Absolutely. So for our listeners, just give them a little preview, no spoilers, about your novella. What happens in Brixton Hill?
Okay, what's going on is it's 1937. Circuses have been hit very hard by the Depression, and they're also trying to compete with the emerging movie theater scene while they're trying to get back on their feet. And my main character, Kate Montgomery, is a talent scout for her family circus, which has really been struggling. And so she travels to Brixton Hill because she has been told there is an act there that is so amazing that it'll turn her family circus fortunes around. But the catch is that the trainer would not tell her in advance what this act does. He wanted her to see it in person. And so when she travels there, she finds out it's a troupe of young women who can command their shadows to dance independently of their bodies, which, she's like, oh my God, that's amazing. But as she finds out more about their circumstances, she's not so sure she wants to go along with this. So
Right. Turns a little horrifying.
Yes, exactly.
Definitely.
And the book is just sort of deals with how that all plays out. So
okay, very cool. And I actually had the wonderful opportunity to read this book, and it was one of those sit down, read it in one reading type tales, and I love that. I love when I can just, from beginning to end, go through the story and find out about the Shadow Dancers. I thought that was such a cool concept, and really, I felt like the atmospheric writing that you do put me in that world in 1939.
great.
Yeah, I thought that was super, super cool. And I too come from, Southern living, small town, and we just have all the spookiness out here. And
Yeah,
when you have to drive 40 minutes to get to civilization and a Walmart or something, there's spooky stuff that goes on out here. So, and, mash that up with creepy circuses and that sort of thing from 1939. I think that's really cool. It was kind of a darker, spooky version of like Water for Elephants, kind of mixed with the Night Circus.
Yeah, the Night Circus is one of my favorite books, so I definitely had that in the back of my head.
Yeah, I could tell that was an inspiration. That was really cool. But then it also gave me like a vibe of sort of an animated, old-timey Disney cartoon with the shadows. Like, how they have the little spooky ghosts that do the dancing. It kind of reminded me of that. Like,
yeah.
Maybe I'll share that on one of our social medias, the clip that I'm talking about. But they have these long, gangly, shadow, ghosty type things, and they're dancing. And I don't know. It just
I think I've seen that. Yeah.
yeah. It gave me those same types of vibes. So I thought that was really cool. And your book delves into sort of urban fantasy, but set in the past. And I thought that was really neat how you kind of blended those unique elements of paranormal, but with the fantasy. Sorry, my video was messing up there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So the concept of the Shadow Dancers is intriguing. Can you explain kind of where that came from? Did you have a dream about it? Did you see something that inspired you? Where'd that come from?
Okay, I had a few different inspirations. The primary one was a very old, wonderful movie called Vampire, directed by Carl Theodor Dreyer, who I dedicated the book to. And it really has to be seen to be experienced and appreciated. But part of that is that at some point, people's shadows just kind of roam around doing their own thing without being attached to their people. And I was thinking, God, that's so cool. That's such an interesting effect. Like even now, I like with movies and all their big effect budgets, that's just still some of the simple older stuff is really impressive. And
oh yeah.
So that's been lodged in the back of my head for a while. And also, right before I had written this, I had watched the 2022 Olympics because I love figure skating, and
I do too.
Yeah, and I had been really, the Russian ladies figure skating team. If you remember, they could just fire off quad jump after quad jump, which no other women in the world can do, and very few men can do relatively. But the more I read about their training, the more I thought, God, that's awful. What they're put through to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so that was in the back of my mind, and I had been working on a story about an evil figure skating coach, and that didn't quite gel. But then at some point I was looking for inspiration, and I read a prompt about shadows, and I thought, well, what if I wrote about these girls who could make their shadows dance? And then what if their trainer was really mean and evil and just kind of putting them through these horrible paces just to get this to work? And it just all came together. It was a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Oh, and then I like that you also have the POV being Miss Montgomery and her kind of exploring and discovering this. So it's not just the doom and gloom of their experience.
Right.
Like it's her figuring it out and like trying to save them and bring, I just thought that was all very cool. But also an exploration, and I think a common theme that resonated throughout your book was that theme of self-discovery and really, figuring out who they are and what they want and what they're about. And that kind of happens for all of your characters.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Kate's trying to prove herself to her dad even after all this time, because she's now, she's in her late 30s, early 40s, I was thinking. So, trying to prove that she can do this, but also sort of the shadow dancers kind of make her confront something about herself that she'd buried, and wanting to be a mother, and there's part of it wants to save the family circus, but she doesn't want to exploit these girls. So, yeah, that's a big stress during a conflict through the entire story. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Very cool journey. I thought it was a very clear character arc going throughout the book. It almost is like you had a whole ass novel in a novella, I mean, you hit all of the marks, and you did a really good job with that. I thought that was great. How, when you're doing writing, how do you balance between that character development, that character arc, with your plot of, ooh, I've got this spooky circus and these dancers, How do you kind of play that out? Do you work on characters first? Do you work on plot first? What do you do?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I usually sort of get a thin plot going first, and then I start thinking about, okay, if I don't already have an idea, because sometimes characters just kind of introduce themselves to me, and that's wonderful when it happens, but it doesn't always. So then I kind of think of, okay, I've got this story, so who's the best person to tell this? And, and I think in both my books so far, it's kind of been sort of a person who's an outsider to the situation, but as they get enmeshed in it, they're sort of like, okay, wow, what's going on here? And I'm hoping that the reader will sort of explore everything through their eyes. So I usually end up starting with a kernel of plot, and then I go back and start figuring out who's going to be in the story, and just trying to build out their characters and doing the worksheets, and just trying to figure out how they'll interact and how they'll carry this through.
Very cool. So it sounds like you're a plotter. You plot your stories out before you write them?
Sometimes I'm chaotic, like sometimes I
chaotic
just
neutral.
Yeah, like sometimes I sit down at the beginning of NaNoWriMo and just start writing with almost no idea where something's going, but other times, I will put out as much as I can in advance, like try to write out a synopsis at least of what I want to have happen. Okay. So yeah, I'm all over the map.
Hey, that's great. That's that creativity. When it hits you, it hits you, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously, with this being set in 1939, you included some references to the Depression and the Ringling Brothers and kind of what was going on with Moviescape and that sort of thing. So I'm assuming you did quite a bit of research in this book. Did you find out anything interesting, intriguing in your research process?
Well, yeah, part of what I've done that with both of my novels so far, is I got access to newspapers.com, because then you can look up archives of newspapers. And since both these characters were from Baltimore, I looked up the Baltimore Sun from like 1937 and just read a lot. You can get an eye for what their fashion's going to be like, what their life was like. It's just really, it's such an interesting glimpse. The one thing I found out in my research that was kind of an oh crap moment was in the original draft of the story, I had the girls dancing to Swan Lake, because I thought, that was perfect music for that. But the problem I found out later on when I was reading another book about the circus is that actually Swan Lake didn't premiere in the United States until 1945. So there's no way these people would have known that. And I was like, right? Oh, no. So.
Those are those fun moments, though, when you're like writing a story and you're like, okay, what happened in history at this time? So that was one of the reasons I was drawn to this book, because I love historical horror. I love taking history and kind of weaving it in there, and just all of that research about the time. And so I think that's really neat, especially because we had, The Greatest Show that came out a couple of years ago, which really romanticized that sort of, history tells us a little bit of a different story.
Yeah.
No bashing here. I love that movie. It's a good one, but as long as you go do a little Google search about what was really going on there,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting. You could feel that you had done that research and put that into the book, and I thought that was really good, because we do have to do our due diligence. We got to make sure that this, especially for the history nerds that are like, wait a minute, that didn't occur that,
Yeah, both of my books had early things in the drafts that when I went back and really researched again, I was like, wait a minute, that's not going to work. That didn't happen back then. Oh, rats, what do I do now?
Yeah.
But
well, and then wait a minute, you changed it to, I can't remember it was another familiar song though. What song did you change it to?
Mozart's Turkish March is the main thing that's referenced quite a bit during the novella, and I figured, okay, I actually still research to make sure, yes, there were Victrola records of that back in that day. There was sheet music. If somebody wants to tell me those characters didn't know that, then they're going to have to prove it to me because, yeah.
And it was most likely used in circus. I mean, it sounds like a very circusy type song. So
Yeah,
I
it
think,
sounded like
yeah.
very, I had my husband listen. I was like, does this sound like something dancey? He's like, yeah, that'll work. So,
Don't you love the spousal input into
oh,
our
yeah, yeah.
writing though? Yes. No, I love that. Except a lot of times my poor husband, our conversations are like, so what if I take this person and I have their skin walking around, like, like so much worse. It just bless his little heart. So anyway, all right. So are there any, I guess those were, my next question was going to be the specific roadblocks or challenges that you experienced in writing. And that probably is it. Historical accuracy. Did you experience any other roadblocks?
Well, the one thing that happened in an early draft that I kind of didn't pay as much attention to as I probably should have was that, okay, I don't know if I can talk about this as being spoiler, but something happens, and both my husband said, okay, I don't really understand why that happened. And at the time I thought it was obvious, so I didn't really worry about it. But then when it made its way to Cemetery Gates Media, my editor said the same thing, and he had a lot of suggestions for how to change that. And like, so yeah, that was kind of a big roadblock, like how to make this seem like a natural thing that would happen as opposed to something that kind of happens out of the blue.
Okay.
So like I said, I can't talk too much about it without getting spoilery, but yeah, that was something I think maybe it got rejected a couple of times before Cemetery Gates picked it up, and that might have been why,
Oh, right, right. Are you talking about the climactic moment?
Yes,
Yeah.
and what leads up to it, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think whatever the choices that you made to fix it fixed it because it flows very smoothly now. So that's good. Can you talk about what your writing process is? Like we know you research and that sort of thing, but when you sit down to write, do you have a specific place that you like to sit? Are you one of these mobile writers? Do you have to be in a coffee shop? What's the vibe like when you're writing a book?
Yeah, no, I have a whole desk set up in the dining room, and that is my spot, where I always sit. I can write in other places, but I like to be here if at all possible. So, I can look out the window and stare at birds when I get distracted or something. I can see them from the window. It's a nice big window. And, yeah, I do almost all my work here. The laptop is here. And I usually just whatever I'm working with, if I'm trying to work out a plot, I try to get a synopsis going. Or after deciding, I don't really get the characters if I'm trying to build them out, doing character questionnaires, trying to really drill down and figure out who they are and how they got to this place.
That's cool. I have a friend. Shout out to Christy P. Swift, author extraordinaire. She does character cards, which are it's kind of like a tarot reading, but for a character. And it's really cool. Like it honestly, we've done it for a couple of characters in my books to really flesh out their arc. And I love that, diving deep into the character because you've got to know them inside and out,
Yeah, I actually went to a course at StokerCon with Evie Knight. She was teaching using the tarot to build your characters and your story out. And I cannot wait to try that. I've got a new deck to try it with and everything. So yeah.
Yes. Well, I'll have to put you in touch with Christy too. She does those character. It's really cool. It's really neat. So I love that. So apart from writing, what other artistic, creative interests or mundane interests do you have in life? What else do you like to do? Tell us about yourself.
I like going to movies. I don't play too many instruments these days, but earlier this year we got a handpan, so I've been trying to teach myself how to play the handpan.
I love I have a handpan.
Oh, do you?
I do. I'm a big time musician, and oh man, that's fun. That is
most
fun.
people I say that to, they're like, "What?" But
oh no, yeah, I speak that language. I love that.
Great.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that a little bit. I'm kind of an amateur vegetarian cook. I don't do really fancy stuff, but I like learning new things that way. And
cool.
I read. My to be read pile is probably gonna call on me and kill me someday because
if there was ever an end of the world where we all needed hundreds of books that we haven't read, like that, you know what I mean? We're ready. We're ready.
Just don't do like Burgess Meredith and break your glasses or something.
Right. Oh my gosh, yes. What are you currently reading?
I've been going through Laurel Hightower's Every Woman Knows This collection, and it's wonderful. She's, I actually heard her read one of the stories at Scares That Care last year, and she's wonderful. I love her work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I agree.
I've been reading Cynthia Pelayo's Loteria, which is just a really fascinating concept.
Yes.
Really enjoying that. And
Awesome.
for nonfiction, I'm reading Killers of the Flower Moon, which is just such an amazing story. It's like, I can't believe it really happened. It's just stunning. So,
I actually just, my friend Dustin, he recommended that book, I think, in Books of Horror recently, the Facebook group Books of Horror. Are you a part of
uh-huh.
that? You should, yeah. There are a
Oh,
lot of
maybe I
great
should be.
recommendations
Yeah.
on, oh, you should. Yeah, they have
Yeah.
a lot of good recommendations, and that was a nonfiction book that he just recommended. So definitely need to check it. Now that I've heard it twice in one day, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
that's a sign, Marie. You need to go
There
read
you
it.
go. Exactly.
So I love that. You have a nice blend of the nonfiction and the fiction. That's
Hmm.
cool. I like to do that too. Usually my nonfiction is true crime. I mean, it's always true
Hmm.
crime. I don't think it ever is anything else. But sometimes biographies. I like to read biographies
Yeah,
too.
I do
But
biographies, or if there's a period in history I'm reading about for a story, I'll do that.
right, right, awesome. So, do you find that you're influenced by any particular writers in general?
um, I think that, somebody who's always been in the back of my head, I think ever since I was a teenager, is Shirley Jackson, because I just think The Lottery is like the perfect horror story. It's so plain told, but it's just so good at building up a sense of dread until that ending. I guess remember the first time I read that, and like, I think I was in fifth grade. I was just like, "Is that even allowed?" It
Right?
just,
Don't you love that when you read a book?
yeah,
You're like, people can do this. This is okay.
yeah. Because a lot of the short stories that people give kids to read in school, it's like, I'm sorry, they're really boring. But that was,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that one's a party for sure. I agree. I think that you do emulate that kind of slow build. It's like a slow burn horror,
yeah,
You're
yeah.
getting
That's
to that, climbing up that roller coaster mountain.
Yeah, that's absolutely how you think both my books really fit that mold. It's sort of slow build, and then all hell the race loop breaks loose at the end.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love that. Very, very Shirley Jackson. That's cool. I like that. Did you watch The Haunting of Hill House?
I watched some of it. I don't know. I kept comparing it to the book and being a little hard on it, I guess. But yeah,
I know, I
I guess,
know.
but
Well,
like,
I've come to a point in my life where I feel like I just have to, because I always am the one sitting in movie, and I love movies, but I'll sit in a movie and I'm like, meh, 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 this is what happened in the book. And
yeah, I
so
know I'm
now I'm
terrible
just
that
trying
way.
to separate them. I'm like, I can appreciate this as a piece of its own media, because like I could probably soapbox about Bram Stoker Dracula, the '90s version with Winona
Hmm.
Ryder, and how different it is from the novel, and I
Oh,
get
big time. Yeah,
spicy about that, but I'm like, I can appreciate it as its own work, and
exactly.
then
Yeah, it's like a.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm trying to
I'm
get there with Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Like, okay, it's not a strict retelling of the book. It's just like an alternate universe take on the same story. So,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So if I'm like, it's in the world, I can appreciate it as it's not kind of like you're a fantasy writer too. You like dark fantasy. Are you a fantasy consumer? The Witcher, Lord of the Rings, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I like the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies and things like that. I'm not too into fantasy compared to horror, but yeah, I will read things like that sometimes. Yeah, I'm not sure where Leigh Bardugo's books fall on that level, but yeah, I loved like the ninth. Ah, my brain is not working today, but yeah, I really love her work. So, mhm.
Awesome, awesome. I have to do the same sort of like with the Rings of Power TV series, just have
Mhm.
to appreciate it as its own thing. And I'm like,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
in the world, it's something, but it's, how I won't get into Galadriel and how all that makes me feel. So
Mhm.
it is what it is. I'm worried though. We have an Exorcist remake coming this year, movie
Mhm.
wise, and I'm like, that is some dangerous territory to be stepping into, especially because
Yes.
we're like so burnt out on possession movies. And I mean,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna speak for everybody. I mean, I love them. I soak them all up in. I love them, but I need something refreshing, but not like they got to stay true to the story.
Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, I was like, when Sandman came out, I wasn't sure what to think because, man, I love that graphic novel, and it's like, how are they ever, ever, ever going to portray that on like
Right,
the
right.
screen?
And
And I
what did
think
you
they did a
think?
pretty good. I thought
I
they
did
did a
too.
good job.
Yeah, I thought
I
it was
miss
good too.
I miss Morpheus's eyes. I guess I realized why that wouldn't have been practical to do, but just small things. But I thought for the most part they did a good job. So yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that
Mhm.
kind of aesthetic atmosphere. They really kind of nailed some of that. I thought it was cool. I was okay
Yeah.
with it. I didn't finish all of it, but I watched some of it and I thought it was neat. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
when you are working on developing your story, because you write a lot of short stories too, short stories, novellas, novels, that sort of thing, you incorporate a lot of mythology and folklore kind of references too. So how do you kind of blend those in with your original ideas?
Um, it's I just kind of think about, I don't know, I'll take like if if I'm working from a story prompt or something, I guess sometimes I'll think it would be fun to take a more modern spin on this very old tale, like Rapunzel or something like that. Just kind of, because a lot of these stories, they don't really get into like the main characters' heads, and like how do you feel this way when all this is going on? Like
Yeah.
this old lady's got you trapped in a tower and she bought you from your parents for a salad, basically. So
I mean,
it's
really though. Yeah. Yeah.
so
I love
it's
reimaginings in that too, because you get to explore
mhm.
different perspectives too,
Yes, yes. So yeah, that's
Like
a lot of
Maleficent was kind of like that, I
yes,
loved that
absolutely.
whole vibe of going into a different character. I think that's really cool. So,
Yeah, yeah.
are were there any particular scenes or characters or ideas from the Shadow Dancers of Brixton Hill that you would like to see adapted in other forms of media, like a film or a graphic novel or art, or what do you
Ooh,
think?
yeah. I think actually Shadow Dancers, I think, would make a very cool graphic novel. I wonder. I think it would be a great medium to explore just the whole concept of that, and the girl's abilities and what happens in the end. That could be really cool. I haven't really thought about it, but yeah, that
Yeah.
would be fun to see, I think.
All right, make it happen. Everybody, listeners, keep a watch. A
Yes,
future
please.
graphic novel coming out. I would love
Graphic
that. I
artists
think that would
out
be
there.
so cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
and actually the cover art on the book is
Mhm.
really gorgeous. Do you happen to know who did the cover art for this?
Yes, that's Luke Spooner from Carrion House. I think he just did such a fantastic job. I was so happy. I was not sure how somebody was going to capture that story idea in a cover, and he knocked it out of the
Gorgeous.
park. Yeah,
Gorgeous. I love the creepy kind of like stare into your soul eyes of the dancers.
I know. I didn't really
And
see that until I got the copy, and I was like, "Whoa!"
yeah, no, really cool. And it gives that spooky um, you know, not theatrical lord, the circus vibe. That's what it is. The
Yeah,
circus
he
vibe.
did it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
and then
that was one of my suggestions. Was like, if he can make it look like maybe an old carnival poster or something, because that would be
yes.
fitting with the book. So yeah, I guess that he did a brilliant job. I
Oh,
love his work. So
gorgeous,
mhm.
gorgeous. It looks really beautiful, and the color scheme and just all of it. It absolutely fits the vibe of the book, and I think
Thank
that
you.
that is excellent, excellent. So, what advice do you have to give any aspiring authors that are looking to kind of break into this business, writing in horror, writing in dark fantasy?
Oh my goodness. Something that I really, really helped me that I would not have necessarily anticipated is try to find a community, like, a group of other writers who are doing what you're doing and you're all sort of on the same level. And it's been so helpful. Like, you mentioned Pitch Wars. That was an amazing community to be a part of. And I know they don't do that anymore, unfortunately, but maybe just getting online and trying to find, groups of people who write what you like to write. Uh, Things like that. Just having people behind you and being able to trade ideas and read each other's work, it makes you better when you can learn how to identify what's not working in somebody else's piece. You can kind of figure out what's not working in your piece. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it's
And I think
definitely.
too, I absolutely agree with you. If I did not have my Right Squad and my Sprinters group, I mean, my foundation friends on social media, that have been with me through the trenches through all these years, like I would be nothing without them, because you
Yeah.
can commiserate with them and then also bounce ideas off of them. But then they understand your writing style because they've read your work and you've read their work. And it's just, I love that camaraderie so much.
Yeah.
But I think it's also beneficial to have a variety too, having like established writers and authors and that sort of thing that you can
Hmm.
lean on for mentorship and that sort of thing. But then
Yeah.
also having people that are kind of at the same level wherever you are in your professional career, writing career, that sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
you go through the query trenches together and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
whole thing.
Swapping queries is really a good thing too when you get to that point.
Mercy, yeah.
Hmm.
Reading all of them, I think, is like, and having. I remember, what is that? What are they used to be a bloodbath? Do they still even exist? The Absolute Right.
Oh yeah,
The
that's still there. I was
is it still there? I haven't been on there in a long time, but yeah, I remember that you had to have some thick skin to go there.
Yeah, I thought that got a little out of hand sometimes, but yeah, it was pretty. Yeah, I think it's still around. But yeah,
Wow. Well, shout out to them because man, they are living it a long time.
I
And
know. My goodness, yeah, I was reading them like way before I actually started pursuing writing as an adult again. So
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think with social media, obviously we can all be so burnt out on all of the different social media things and the trends and the posting,
yeah,
but it is the place to find a community and to find, I mean, we're both members of the Horror Writers Association. Obviously, we just got back from StokerCon.
yep,
Finding your local communities, finding the chapter that's nearest to you, that for our listeners, if you're wanting to get involved in more of that writing process, that's the first place you should go, finding writing
definitely.
groups. I mean,
Yes, yes, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Mhm.
that is, I absolutely agree. One of the most, the foundation, the cornerstone of getting into the writing world, and just being able to feel like you're not alone. You're not on this island of, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
writing and what do I do? And yeah, so
Yeah, I've been kind of sad to see a lot of the pitch contests go away on Twitter because those are really a great way to meet other writers and just sort of start, swapping work and talking. So that's kind of a
absolutely.
bummer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Right Squad that I mentioned earlier, that we came out of a Pitch Wars, gosh, 2016, 2017 ish.
Hmm.
I think it was in that kind of era where we all came together and formed a critique group. And then
Yeah.
now it's been years, and I've seen all of them in person, almost except for one. And it's
Oh
StokerCon is,
wow.
yeah, in San Diego next year. I'm going to see my last one, and where I
Oh
will have met
cool.
everyone in person. So, so let's talk about StokerCon. Was that you went to? I know you went to AuthorCon in Williamsburg too.
Hmm.
So was that your first StokerCon? Have you been going for years? How was your experience?
Oh my goodness. It was my first in-person StokerCon. I went to the virtual one for the last 2 years, including the one that was all virtual because nobody could leave their house.
Right.
But yeah, that was my first in-person one, and it was amazing. It was just so because I met so many people in person for the first time who I had never, I talked to a lot online, but I'd never seen them, and there were so many people that had helped me out when Tidepool was coming out. Other authors like Linda Addison, Gwendolyn Keist, they didn't have to do anything for me. I'm a nobody, but they did, and it was so
Right.
nice to talk to them and thank them for that. And also Gabino Iglesias, he is just a wonderful person and a
Oh
great
my
writer.
God, what
So
a
I was
sweetheart. Yes.
God, I tell you, I will never forget when he got that Stoker. Like I thought the roof was going to blow off the place, and
Oh
he
my
deserved it.
God. Yes. Yeah. And you know what? I was so late to the game. I had not read that book yet. And I
Mhm.
finally did. I finally corrected that error. And holy shit. Like, what a
Yeah,
transformational novel. I feel like that's all. This is the Gabino Appreciation podcast because I just like, I love that book so much. And it was
yeah.
so deserving of the Stoker this year,
Yeah, I
for
love the way it
sure.
just really blended thriller and horror in just like such a
Oh,
seamless way. None of it seemed strange or out of place. So
it was
yeah, it
awesome.
was just I got to meet him in person finally because I made my first pro fiction shorts, my short fiction first pro sale to him. So yeah, but
Oh, that's awesome. Kind of full circle moment then.
yeah, and he's
Awesome.
always doing things to boost other authors. So I just think
Hmm.
he's great. So, but also I got to meet friends that I had met in workshops in the past. Got to see them again finally. So that was great, and I just loved it. I loved every minute of it.
Yeah,
It was.
the feeling of community at
Mhm.
StokerCon is just. I just don't think there any other genre can compete. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna put it out there
Yeah.
because it's a big old horror family, and
Yeah,
everybody's.
it's
I love how it's not competitive. It's like competitive enough, but it's like everyone's trying to lift each other up too.
yeah, that's
You
what I've really
know?
liked about the HWA. It really feels like, maybe there's jerks. I don't know, but if there are, I haven't run into them yet, thank goodness. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I
We
mean,
take care of them. Just kick them out now.
yeah, I mean, they will get excommunicated as we saw last year, but yeah, for the most part, everybody's been lovely. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. That is awesome. So you planning to go to San Diego?
oh, I hate, 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 hate flying, but I'm going to try.
Awesome. That's
I'm so
awesome.
terrified of flying, so
Well,
we'll
you know what?
see.
I got some advice for you because we fly all the time,
Hmm.
and I miraculously still have flight anxiety. I mean, I've literally
Hmm.
flown like hundreds of times. Okay, I've
Oh my
spent my
goodness.
whole life flying, and I learned number one, researching and finding out like talking with pilots and talking, researching, finding out what are the actual statistics of there being any problems? And you're
Mm-hmm.
literally safer in an airplane than you are in a car. Like, you're safer in an airplane than you are in a car, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so then that, and also CBD. Woohoo! Shout out to CBD. So I take copious amounts of CBD, get on an airplane, and I'm just happy as a clam. I could ride it all the way to the ground. Like, it would be totally fine. So
Yeah, if I can get a glass of wine at the
that's your
airport
little
bar, yeah.
flying tidbit.
Yeah, if I can get a glass of wine at the airport bar, I'm usually cool for the rest of the flight. But obviously, an early morning flight that doesn't quite work. So,
oh, hold on, Nicole.
uh-oh.
Let's try that again. Hold on, your signal's cutting out on me.
Oh
I
no.
can cut all of this out. Let's see.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can
Okay,
see you
good.
again.
Okay. Sorry
you're
about
clear
that.
again. Okay, so I'm just gonna snap. That way I'll know that's where I need to cut off, and then say what you were gonna say again. Okay, so ready?
Okay. Yeah, if I can have a glass of wine at the airport bar, then I'm good. But sometimes for a morning flight, that's not really practical.
You'll be just fine.
But yeah, we'll see.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? No, I think, and San Diego, that's going to be such an interesting, I've heard, or maybe I saw somewhere that that's one of the most haunted cities in the United States.
Oh, cool.
So
okay.
I think, yeah, I didn't know that.
I didn't either. I'd never heard
there's
that.
There's all kinds of spooky shit there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was a new one for me. I'm lobbying. I know they had it in New Orleans, or Worldcon or something was in New Orleans a few years ago, but I'm like, we need a StokerCon in New Orleans. That's where we need to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was so bummed out.
How fun would that be, right?
Yeah. I was supposed to go to a writing workshop in Salem and stay at a haunted hotel, but then the pandemic put an end to that. I'm still bummed out. I would love to do that someday.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
It sounded like so much fun.
That's one of the places I haven't been yet.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, so I was like, wow, how cool is that going to be?
Imagine the vibes too, like writing in a horror. Yeah, that's
in a haunted hotel. Yeah,
I need Salem is on the bucket list. That is so cool. Very cool. And you said you're from, remind me again, you're from Virginia.
Yeah, I'm living in Northern Virginia right now.
Do you have any kind of haunted locations in Virginia?
Honestly, you think you would pick up a lot of vibes from, because I'm right close to a bunch of Civil War battlefields. I haven't picked up too much yet, but I've been proofing an anthology for the Horror Writer. Yeah. But the most haunted place I've ever been was my aunt's house in Pennsylvania. I swear, it's like it wasn't even.
Jeez. Okay, so familial ghosts.
I don't know what it was. It was
cool.
It would just be these wild energies in this house. Like when I go to sleep in the bedroom at night, I feel like there is this entity in the corner of the room just watching me. And when I was little, I was terrified. But when I got older and it was still there, I started trying to ask her. I felt like it was female, and I was like, who are you? What are you doing? And I never got a response, but it was just so crazy, And
wow.
Another time when I was in there, I heard the piano playing in the middle of the night, and there was nobody who could play the piano like that in the house at that point, and they would not have been doing it at like 3:00 in the morning, even if they could. So, and everybody always acted like I was the only one who heard or experienced that there, but I wonder,
Well, and maybe they were just trying to speak to you, I mean, like, I'm a hardcore ghost believer, so, like, if you listen to past episodes of the pod, we have a ghost that we lovingly refer to as Ghosty that lives up in we call it the attic room, but it's one of the upper level bedrooms of my house.
Oh, cool.
Oh, yeah, and we were on an episode with a psychic medium, and our phone started ringing, and none of our phones were ringing. And we were talking about Ghosty, and I was like, oh my God, it's Ghosty trying to be on the pod right now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't mess with Ouija boards, though. I'm a little get nervous about that. But
yeah, it's funny. Every horror writer I know, that's the one thing they do not mess with is Ouija boards.
Yeah, well, I think it's just because we like to separate ourselves from I don't know what it is. It's like, I can write the most horrifying exorcism scene and all these things. I can really dive into some darkness. But in real life, when I start, like when we had when we first started noticing the presence of ghosty, I mean, right as soon as we moved in, and there was some creepy stuff going on with my son where he was saying like he was like, Mommy, I see black dripping from the ceiling. And I was like, oh, hell no.
Oh wow,
Hell
yeah.
no. I'm like, it is time for a cleansing. Somebody get some, we are not doing this, you know? So I'm like,
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
spooky shit, but not when it comes into my home, you know?
Yeah, I like to be able to turn the page or the channel, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly. Control the narrative. That's what they say. That
Mhm.
it like the reason we flock to horror is because it helps us work through things that we can have control of. Like you're in a safe, settled environment. You can stop reading the book if you want to. You can stop watching the movie if you want to. You know, like
Yeah, yeah, it's a safe place to work out your fears. Exactly.
absolutely, absolutely. So very cool. So San Diego. I'm trying to round up. I'm like, I'm gonna go do all the haunted shit. Whatever there is, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go
Yeah,
see
I
it.
had no idea. I'm gonna have to hear more about that, definitely.
Yeah, sounds super cool. So, if you had a chance to co-author a book with anyone, living or deceased, who would it be?
Oh my goodness, gosh. Wow. Goodness. I would almost have. I would think the first person that came to mind when you said that was, I think, Gwendolyn Keist. I love her writing. It's so poetic, and I would love to learn more of how she does what she does because it's. I know I don't write that way. I would love to, but
Yes,
I just love
yes.
her work so much. It's
And
just
she's such a
so.
rock star of a person. I don't know her
Yeah,
personally yet, but I intend to because she
yeah. She's
seems so nice. Yeah.
she is a sweetheart. I got to meet her at StokerCon, and she just could not have been. She's every bit as kind in person as she seems online. So yeah.
That's
But I'm just
awesome.
in awe of the way she puts everything together and just the beauty of her writing. You know, it's just, I wish I could be a more poetic writer sometimes. I like what I do. I'm sort of straightforward, but, I'd love to be able to write more melodically sometimes like her. So,
She does. It kind of has a lyrical quality to it. Her
yes,
writing does, and
yes.
I love that too. I'm all about that style. So, all right, Gwendolyn, if you're listening to the pod, you and Nicole hook it up, write us up. Let's have a
Yeah,
thing.
no
Let's make it
pressure.
happen. Oh, I love that. Okay, so is there anything else about the Dancers of Brixton Hill that we have not talked about before we jump into our lightning round?
Goodness, yeah, I think we've covered most of what I talked about, the whole having to change the music from Swan Lake and everything and things
Yeah,
like that. It was one of those rare experiences where the first draft of the book, it really felt like it almost wrote itself, and I was just kind of along for the ride, which that doesn't always happen, and when it does, it's just magic. So,
that's so fun.
I mean, it
Yeah.
did get changed up a lot, like I said, especially after Joe from Cemetery Gate sent me some suggestions. But yeah, the first draft just came very easily. So,
That's awesome.
yeah, it's one of my favorite things I've ever written. I hope people will discover it and enjoy it. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. And tell our listeners where they can find that book actually to purchase.
the main spot is, Amazon. It is available in print and ebook. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it is free on Kindle Unlimited. I think some other bookstores like Barnes and Noble are picking it up online, so you may be able to find it there if you don't want to deal with Amazon. So, you should be able to find it easily online, hopefully.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So they just Google the Shadow Dancers of Brixton Hill, or you have lots of links on your website too, which is
yeah,
yeah. Your website is. Tell the listeners what your website is.
it's www.nicolewilson.com, and Wilson has two L's. Just that I think my ancestors did that. They just changed it up to be really difficult. So,
They just were like, you know what, we're super will, right? We just have to have all of it. No, I love it. I think it's unique. It looks good. Okay, are you ready for our lightning round?
I am ready.
Okay, here we go. So you're just gonna, off the top of your head, first answer that comes to mind, whichever one speaks to you the most. Okay.
Okay, great.
And then if you want to dive further in the topic or explain why you made that choice, that's totally okay too. So
Okay.
here we go. Ghost or demon?
Ghost, definitely ghost. Yeah,
Definitely,
I don't
yeah.
want to be dealing with any damn demons.
No.
Ghost I can
Same.
handle.
Yeah. Okay. Haunted house or abandoned asylum?
I would have to say haunted house because I've already been in a haunted house and I actually, it wasn't so bad.
Okay,
really,
you're like, I could go back, vacation home,
yeah, totally, absolutely.
Okay. Werewolf or vampire?
Oh, vampires, they were my first horror love. I think they will always be my first horror love. So.
Yes, yeah. Well, when you said vampire, I'm like, it's going to be vampires. Yeah.
Yeah, surprised.
Yeah. Okay. Cursed object or possessed person?
Cursed object. I would go with the curse. I think I probably have some of those in here
Yeah,
already. But
yeah,
yeah, that
safer
seems like
choice for sure.
yes.
Okay, supernatural powers or immortality?
Oh gosh. Probably immortality. That just seems like I would love to live through all these different eras, and of course that would open up a whole lot of interesting issues, like how am I going to keep getting new IDs and stuff when I'm not dead? But I'll work it up
Mm-hmm.
that when it I'll work that out when it comes to it.
Yes. I asked my husband that question the other day, and he went within the supernatural powers direction. I was like, hell no, I'm trying to see all of what there is to see. Let's be immortal,
Exactly.
like a tiny blip of existence or all the days. I'm going for all the days for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, witchcraft or necromancy?
Oh, I would think I would go with witchcraft for that. Necromancy scares me a little bit. I mean, witchcraft scares me too, but it seems manageable. I enjoy reading about it.
Yes.
Necromancy, like, I don't know. I don't want like rotten people walking around or something.
Yeah, we don't need any monkey's paw shit happening right
No, no, no.
now.
Mm-mm.
Okay, I think I probably know the answer to this one too. Ouija board or tarot cards?
Tarot cards. I've got like about a billion decks here, so
Yes, tarot. I'm like looking around. I have a really cool Edgar Allan Poe set that
oh,
yeah, it's really neat. It is. It's cool. I don't. It's somewhere up here in my spooky room, but
yeah. It's
yeah.
funny. I never had a Rider Waite deck until the AV Nights class at StokerCon, and she gave them out. So like it's the first time I've had a Rider Waite deck in a long time. So
Oh, that's fun. That's
yeah,
awesome. I
yeah.
can't wait to see how your experience goes with that once you try it. You'll have to let me know. I want to know how that
Yeah,
goes for
yeah.
you. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Oh, I think I know the answer to this one too. Dark Forest or Sinister Carnival?
Oh, Sinister Carnival. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm starting
Yeah.
to rewatch Carnival on Max again. So
Oh, that's fun. Yes,
Mhm.
yes. Okay, psychological thriller or supernatural horror?
Supernatural horror. That's always like, and that's been one of my first reading loves, and I think it always will be. So,
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, Gothic Mansion or Creepy Cabin?
I would go with the Gothic Mansion. I would love to explore all that.
Yeah, you gotta
Like,
have the big flowing
definitely.
dress so you can run through it like a damsel in
Yeah,
distress.
candelabra, the whole deal. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Okay, witch hunt or vampire hunt?
Oh gosh, I would have to say vampire hunt because that would imply that there are actually vampires around, and I would love to see one. So
You're like,
yes, I
I would
would go.
like to be a vampire, thanks.
Yeah, immortality thing. Here.
Yes,
I can
yes.
stay out of the sun, no problem.
I volunteer as tribute.
Exactly.
Okay, Edgar Allan Poe or H.P. Lovecraft? Obviously, they're writing, not who they were as people.
Oh, Edgar Allan Poe, I think mostly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah.
definitely. Okay, seance or exorcism?
Oh, I would want to do a seance. I think that sounds like so very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, you're inviting it in, and we'll see. Yeah.
Exactly. If it goes bad, it's my fault. Exorcism. Who knows what's gonna happen?
Ghostly apparition or eerie whispers?
Oh. I think I would go with the apparition. Just because I think something I can see and experience, it'll probably hit me more where I live.
Definitely, definitely. I think the eerie whispers will be like, "Oh God, is that in my head, or am I like, what is happening?
Yeah,
Have I finally
exactly.
become unhinged?" Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, time travel or parallel universes?
Ooh, time travel. Definitely. I would love to do that.
Oh man, me
Doctor Who is
too.
gold for me.
Oh God, same. I love it. I love it. I
Mhm.
wish I could time travel for sure. Except they would kill my ass as I went back in time immediately. They'd be like, "What is wrong with her? She's
Yeah,
too
I'd
much."
probably get burned as a witch or
Yeah.
something. So
Like that one, there's too much going on over there. She gotta go. Okay, classic horror literature or modern horror films?
I would have to say modern horror films. I love classic horror literature, but some films, once in a while you'll get find someone that does something that's so interesting. It just really sticks with me and sort of it's just a very enjoyable experience. So maybe it's
Yeah.
blasphemy, but I would go with the films.
No, no, I think because horror, we're in a renaissance right now. We're having a moment for sure. And I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the horror films are taking a different direction, kind of like Jordan Peele and his work is
Yes.
so
Mm-hmm.
cool. Like it's just bringing in such different cool vibes and different ways of looking at horror. And I love that. I love that.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I'm really into what the movies are doing recently for sure.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yes.
no, I agree with you. I think modern
Mm-hmm.
horror films are super cool. Okay, zombies or mummies?
Oh my God. I would probably go with the mummy because I could outrun that guy easily. It's like, oh, here comes the mummy. Better walk a little faster. So
Yeah, no, now that we have the fast zombies, I can't keep up with that.
yeah,
Like,
no, those
that,
ones that run like Usain Bolt, like no, thank
no,
you.
no, can't be doing it. Okay, doppelganger or shapeshifter?
Ooh, ooh. My instinct was doppelganger. I don't know why. That just kind of sounds cool.
Yeah, yeah, a little more predictable because then you're like, oh wait, I know how to deal with you. You look exactly like me. And then shapeshifter, you're
Yes.
like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Okay,
Whoa.
final question of our lightning round: shrouded mystery or terrifying revelation?
Ooh, ooh. I would probably go with the shrouded mystery, just because it could turn into a terrifying revelation, but maybe not. So that would be fun.
Oh, thinking like a writer there. I like it. I like
Exactly.
it. Awesome. Well, Nicole, it has been so awesome having you on the pod today. I know
Thank
our
you.
listeners, they can find you on your website. They can also find you on what social media can they find you on?
Okay, I'm on Twitter as Insomnicole because I didn't think about picking a writer name, but it's INSOMNICOLE. Sorry about that. I should have picked something a
That's
little
okay. I'll
easier.
post the link under the episode so they'll be able to
Hmm.
find you. Mhm.
I'm on Blue Sky, NicoleWilson.bsky.com. I think that's what the handle is. And I'm on Instagram and also Threads as Nicole W. Reads. So, but
Awesome.
yeah, you can always find me at my website, failing all else.
Okay, cool. And then we will definitely keep a listen out for when your 2024 novel, The Keeper of the Key, starts
Oh
coming out,
yeah,
right?
I'm
Yeah.
so
So,
excited. Yeah, yeah, that should come out in fall 2024. So looking forward to finally getting that out in the world.
okay, awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will keep up with you and keep in touch. Maybe we'll have you back on the pod sometime, okay?
I would love it. Yeah, please
Okay,
do. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you, Moss. Let's go fly to the flame. Bye
Sounds.
bye.
Bye bye.